Hello, world. Can everyone hear me okay? Well, so nice to see so many people and so many familiar faces and names now. These are CS50's office hours, which, if unfamiliar, are a tradition on campus for students to be able to visit professors' offices and ask them questions about courses they're taking, about computer science or life more generally. These office hours via Zoom are meant to be an online adaptation of that for anyone around the world online. And I'm so pleased to be joined, as always, with CS50's own Brian Yu.
Hi, everyone. So good to see everyone here today, and looking forward to hearing all of your questions.
And we have a very special guest as well, whom you might have seen on video over the past several years, CS50's own Tommy McWilliam.
Hi, excited to be here. Great to meet everybody.
So we'll dive in just a moment, but for those less familiar, a quick tour of what's available to you in terms of Zoom's interface. Along the bottom of your screen, you should see a participants button or some such button in your own spoken language. Do go ahead and click that, and you'll see a list of everyone else who's in the room here right now. Also along the bottom of your screen is a chat button. Do go ahead and click the chat button, and you should see a chat window appear under the participants window. In fact, if everyone would like to say hello to everyone else here and where in the world you are from in the chat window, you should start to see a whole bunch of messages scroll by quickly. So please feel free to do that. And if you would like to share links to related resources or answer questions of other people in the chat during these office hours, please do feel free. However, if you'd like to ask a question of office hours, I'm afraid the chat window scrolls by too quickly and too many hands tend to go up. We're going to use a Google form as always instead. Brian has kindly just shared his screen with the URL that you should visit if you would like to ask a question during these office hours about CS50, about computer science, or the real world more generally. Go to cs50.ly/ask. If, Brian, you wouldn't mind perhaps pasting that into the chat window as well. So do take the next couple of minutes if you'd like to ask a question of me or Brian or Tommy via that URL there. In the meantime, why don't we go ahead and get to know Tommy, whom you might recall from CS50's mobile tracks on Android or iOS. If you're currently taking CS50X 2020, you might not have gotten that far yet, but at the end of the semester, you'll have an opportunity to follow a different track of interest to you, either on web programming, on game development, or on one of Tommy's tracks on Android and iOS. But before we start to take questions from the group, Tommy, do you want to share a bit about how you found your way to computer science?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Boston and went to Harvard for undergrad. And so I started learning computer science when I was in high school. I don't know if anybody remembers, there was this TV show on in the early 2000s called BattleBots. And it was about these little robots, and there was like this arena and the robots would like fight. And I thought that was like the coolest thing ever. And in high school, a friend of mine was starting this robotics team, and I thought it was going to be BattleBots. It wasn't. It was just like robots moving, pieces around a board. But I thought that was the coolest thing, and so that's how I started learning programming. Is I just sort of taught myself, just sort of read some articles and books on C programming, and then when I entered Harvard as a freshman, I took CS50 in my first semester, and that was actually my first actual CS course. And I remember, before, when I was writing robots, I'd they were all written in C, and so I would call malloc all the time, and I didn't know you're supposed to call free. And that was one of my first memories of CS50. It was like, oh man, I've been doing this wrong for 4 years. So yeah, and then I was one of the head TFs of CS50 for 3 years, so around like 2010 to 2013 or so. And then I was also involved with the sort of first version of edX. So the first version of CS50 we put on edX and sort of helping them with, filming videos of me, but also doing some software development. So things like our discussion boards and submission software, I helped write early versions of those.
And you might recall Tommy from most recent years, too, if you followed along with some of CS50's videos, that he has wonderfully led a prep and practice for technical interviews. In fact, if I may, let me share the URL of that if you'd like to watch a little something later. And if indeed you yourselves are ready for or are thinking in the future of applying for technical jobs of some sort, whether it's programming or the like, do take a look at that video there, which you might find helpful preparation as well. So since last leading that session, Tommy, you've gone off and started your own company. Would you like to share a little bit with folks about what problems you're trying to solve?
Yeah, definitely. So we've been working on this new company. It's called Serenade. We started working on this after a really good friend of mine who was an engineer as well. He developed this injury in his wrists It's similar to something like carpal tunnel, if you've heard of that before, but it basically made typing at a keyboard really painful for him. And so Serenade is this platform where you can write code by speaking rather than typing. So you could say into your microphone something like create a function called main and add an argument called argc, and we'll transcribe that and actually transform that into syntactically valid code for you. So it means that anyone with some sort of injury or disability that prevents them from typing can actually be able to write code full time and be productive again. So that's what we're working on, sort of, building out the first version of that and trying to bring it to everybody who needs it.
Well, Brian has kindly shared the URL of the website, serenade.ai, if you would like to take a look. And if you just joined us, just a quick reminder that if you'd like to ask any questions of me or Brian or Tommy during these office hours today, do go to cs50.ly/ask. We won't be relying on Zoom's blue hands or the chat window, which tend to fly by a little too quickly. But in just a moment, we'll start fielding some of those questions as well. Lastly, Tommy, I always describe you, I'll admit to folks, as probably the best programmer I know. And in fact, for those less familiar, when Tommy was still at Harvard and we used to travel with the team to conferences around the world, I was always struck by just how, Tommy, you could like program in like any environment. We would literally be like waiting for an airplane to take off at an airport, and Tommy would be sitting like on top of his luggage, like fixing some bug or implementing some feature. And so it occurs to me that you might be particularly well suited to give people advice on like how you actually become a good programmer and what it means to be a good programmer.
Man, that's a fun question. It's a shame we only have an hour. I could spend a lot of time on it. I think for me, I just really love it, and I think something that a lot of developers have is they sort of get into this mindset of like, okay, I need an 8-hour block, and I need like the super focus, so I can like it takes me like 2 hours to get up to speed. And I think I think that's sort of like the natural kind of feeling. But I think once you sort of get into this mindset of like, okay, I have 30 minutes in between meetings. What's a task I could do in 30 minutes? And maybe that task is really small. It could just be, I found a couple typos in the documentation page. Let me just go fix them and push them. But that's something I think about a lot is, okay, given my day, I have all these different slots. Let me try to plan for these small little tasks that I can do in between these larger things. And then once you do that, you can sort of get into this mode where it doesn't take as much time to sort of get into that flow state. You can just sort of jump in and work on, here's this little time box thing. Is if I do that, then I'm going to feel like I'm productive. I like accomplished that goal. And so that's sort of a mindset I have with productivity. Is I try to plan my day and say, I have 4 hours of time in between meetings today. How can I best spend those time? I think it takes a lot of practice, but once you get used to that, you can sort of just get into that mode.
Yeah, I'll admit it really does work. I think I must have called or texted Tommy months ago, maybe a year or two ago now, like just completely frustrated at how long everything was taking. And I too was the type of person who needed to like clear the entire day in order to accomplish anything with code. But I've actually gotten much better now at quantizing projects with just small bite-sized tasks. And if you're familiar with GitHub, you can create what are called issues, which are kind of like a to-do list for yourself. And so I find myself when I add issues to GitHub, actually adding like 5 or 10 of them, but each of them is like very small, because honestly it's such a happy feeling when you're able to like check something off and be like done. Even if it's just a tiny part of the goal, you at least do feel like, or I certainly do, like you're making progress. So why don't we begin to take some questions from the group? And again, if you would like to ask your own, don't raise your hand or don't try to ask in chat. Instead, go to cs50.ly/ask. Sujit, would you like to say hello and where you're from and ask your question of the group? Sujit?
Yes, thank you. David, the question is, what next step after CS50 would you recommend for someone aspiring to make a software or an app which works by having access to massive database? For example, something like a building information modeling, the BIM as it's called in architecture, or something like a food delivery app where users can choose from a variety of options.
Yeah, let me send that question to Tommy, perhaps. Tommy, prior to Serenade, worked at Quora, which I dare say is a company with a very large data set, and can perhaps speak to this best.
Yeah, I think what's cool today is that there's so many free APIs out there that you can use to sort of build your own larger data sets. So I think one thing to do is just sort of practice, look around at some of these APIs or these large data sets that are released by large companies and just, try to do something, try building some simple analytics or build something on top of that data set. And then that'll sort of teach you these skills that you'll learn to, someday when you have your own large data set, sort of what it's like to manage that. So I definitely leverage some of those, free resources that are out there and try building something yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sujit, for that question. Can we go next to Tejas, if you'd like to say hello and where you are from? Tejas?
Yeah, hello, I'm Tejas. Yeah, I'm 13, and I've taken this course to learn programming in depth. So a major problem with me is that I take a long time to solve one problem. Like, say a problem set takes me over like a week. So I wanted to ask you how to approach a problem set differently from a different angle so you can solve it faster.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Brian, do you want to offer your advice on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. And the first thing I'd say is absolutely don't feel bad if it's taking you a week to solve the problem sets. Even at the college, we give students a week to complete each of the problem sets, and we know that they are challenging problems. If you in a week are able to solve a problem set, that's something definitely to be proud of. But in terms of how to think about approaching problems, this is in part, I think, something that will come with a little bit of practice. That one thing you'll find in computer science in particular is that a lot of problem solving really is about identifying similar problems that you have solved before or that other people have solved before. And the more that you program, the more that you're working on solving these sorts of problems, the more you'll be able to recognize when there's a type of problem that someone else might have already solved. And the other thing I'd add, just in terms of thinking more generally about how to brainstorm and think about different solutions to other problems, is to talk to other people. So CS50 as a community of other students you're welcome to talk to about these problems. And oftentimes just by sharing perspectives, you might hear some other perspective from someone else that might be valuable to you. And you might have some valuable perspectives to offer to someone else too.
And I can definitely empathize too. I feel like every project I tackle when it comes to programming always takes that long, and it never seems to be done. There's always new features or bugs to tackle the next day. Well, thank you for that question, Theas. Can we go next to Frederick, if you'd like to say hello and where in the world you are from? Frederick?
Hello, my name is Frederick. I'm from Germany. And I'm thinking about going into computer science as teaching, as an educator as well. And I was wondering if you could share some things which maybe were different than you expected when you started teaching, and maybe some things that were like you expected as well.
Yeah, I think probably any of us can answer that. One of the thoughts that comes to mind is just how much work goes on behind the scenes. For instance, I feel like to this day, I'm constantly having to explain to friends or family that, yes, even though CS50 only meets for 2-hour lectures once a week, that doesn't mean that I'm free the rest of the day and the rest of the week. Somehow, all of the time is filled by preparing for those classes, fielding questions from students or other teaching fellows, thinking about the next week's material, thinking about the next year's version of the class. And the same goes for the spring semester and the summer term too, where we're sort of constantly reinventing this class at least and working on new versions thereof. And so I would say that there's just a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and it's a much bigger managerial challenge, I would say, than it is only a teaching challenge. Tommy, reflecting back on your TFing days, do other thoughts come to mind?
Yeah, that's definitely one. I think, I would go to a CS50 section and think, oh, wow, that was great, and sort of underestimate the amount of time it took to prep all of that. I think another thing that I thought was pretty interesting was that, when I explain something, there's something that naturally resonates with me, maybe some particular way of explaining pointers or something. But what resonates with me is often very different with what might resonate with somebody else. And so I think it's something I learned to appreciate, was trying to explain the same thing in a few different ways, since those different things would resonate with different people. So I thought that was always pretty interesting to see.
And Brian, how about you as well, having not only TF'd, but also taught and created these most recent courses?
Yeah, I think that in the process of creating a course and thinking about what the curriculum should be and what types of projects students should be working on, I think one thing that has really surprised me in CS50 at least has just been looking at the end of the semester at how much students are able to achieve in a fairly short amount of time, and just realizing that even students who don't come into the class with prior programming experience, which is true of most of the students that take the class, it really is amazing what just a little bit of practice and learning some of the basic building blocks can do in terms of helping students to use those building blocks to build something of their own, take advantage of and learn tools that we didn't teach as part of the class. So that always impresses me every year, especially when looking at students' final projects and seeing what they create.
Yeah. Thank you, Frederick, for that question. Can we go next to Akash, if you'd like to say hello and where in the world you are from, Akash?
Hey, I'm from New Orleans, and I wanted to ask about how I could improve my coding skills from like problem solving and from a logical standpoint.
Sure. Brian, do you want to, you're maybe closest to having gone through school. Do you want to speak to that one?
Yeah, sure. So when you're trying to solve a problem and you're trying to think about it logically, I think the first, well, a couple of things I'll say. First thing I'd say is that oftentimes you can start, if you're trying to solve a problem, just by thinking about what the most obvious solution is, even if it's not the most efficient, even if it might not be the easiest to implement, but you start with something, some way to solve the problem. And then you might be able to think about it a little more critically and ask yourself, all right, if I have a solution that might not be the most efficient or the best way to solve a problem, how could I improve upon that solution and make changes to it? So one thing I suggest to all of the students that I work with is, after you finish writing a piece of code the first time, you're not done yet. Go back and look at it and see, is there a way you can make that code better and improve it? And that process of reflecting on your own code will make you a better thinker and will make you a better programmer. And the other thing that I'd say is similar to what David mentioned a little in response to a previous question, is just to take bigger problems and try and break them down into smaller pieces. That often a big problem can sometimes seem unmanageable for how on earth are you going to try to tackle it. But if you can segment it into smaller bits that you're going to tackle one piece at a time, those individual pieces are often things that are easier to figure out a solution for, and when taken together can end up solving a bigger problem.
Yeah, well, best of luck with your studies, Akash. How about Hawei? Can we go to you next if you'd like to say hello and where you're from?
My name is Hawei, and I'm from San Jose, California.
Nice to meet.
And I'm 63, and I'm retired. Not really retired. I'm actually a hardware engineer before.
Okay.
Yeah. So I have actually two questions. The first question is, I'm disabled, and oftentimes I have problem when I'm writing code because I only have one hand. I make a lot of mistakes, and I'm doing not that fast. And instead of waiting to the end to compile the code and find out all these typo errors,
Yeah,
I was wondering, is there any method, any new technology that can enable a disabled person to program to write code more better, more efficient, and more effective?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked this today because Tommy is exactly the person that I would ask this question of. Tommy, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, so so I'm actually currently working on a project to help people with disabilities write code. So a good friend of mine was in a similar condition. He injured both of his wrists and basically couldn't use a keyboard at all. And so we're building this new product called Serenade. You can go to serenade.ai. And it's basically a platform to let you write code by speaking rather than typing. And so, there's no need to use a keyboard at all. You could just dictate code by saying something like create a function, add an argument, add a return value, and we'll sort of write all the syntactically correct code for you. So yeah, that's something that we hope will help folks with disabilities. And there's some other software out there as well. Dictation in general, it's built into Mac OS, so you can tell the Mac to click different things. And so there's lots of cool software coming out to help folks with different disabilities use a computer more effectively.
Indeed. Hawei, did you have a second question, a follow-up as well?
So I'm trying to working on one of my project. Actually, I tried to start a startup to do. I have a BCI device pretty much done from a hardware standpoint, and I try to develop or ask somebody or do it myself application software so I can actually market this, and I have customer for this already. So from a person like me, actually I'm a beginner in doing this programming, and my plan is to try to apply Python and use the deep learning and some sort of artificial intelligence to finish this project. And from a beginner standpoint, can somebody tell me how long will it take for me to learn and to complete this project?
That's always a good question. And because of your interest in AI, let me turn to our expert, Brian here, if I could.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can give an exact time frame. It's probably going to vary based on the project and what kinds of things you're going to be doing. But one thing that I would say is that nowadays, if you want to use artificial intelligence and machine learning inside of a project, it's not necessarily a requirement that you know all the details of how exactly to implement a neural network, for example, or how to actually write any of these AI algorithms, because increasingly there are libraries, just off-the-shelf tools out there that will do a lot of the mathematics of the machine learning for you, so that even if you don't know the mathematics yourself, you can still use those tools to be able to integrate something like machine learning into a project that you're working on. So that might be something worth taking a look at.
Indeed. And Howei, I've gone ahead and pasted my email address into the chat, mailin@harvard.edu. With regard to the software to facilitate typing more readily, if you'd like to email me, I'm happy to connect you with Tommy, if he doesn't mind, so that you can take a closer look at the software, if that might help you in particular.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, allow us to go next to Stefan, if you'd like to say hello and where you are. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Stefan.
Hi, I'm Stefan. I'm from Romania. So my question is, when you finish the 8 weeks and you're choosing your track, what would be the criteria on which to base your choice? And do you think it is important to choose one and focus on it, or try all of them in order to explore different aspects of programming?
That's a good question. There's certainly no downside in trying all 4 of them ultimately, though perhaps not before finishing just one of them. For those unfamiliar, CS50X 2020 has indeed an end of semester choice of tracks, one of which is web programming, which tended to be the only track in years past. Another of which is on game development, led by CS50's own Colton Ogden, who you might have met at a previous office hours. And then 2 of them are led by Tommy, in fact, on Android or iOS development. Tommy, given that you teach half of them, do you want to speak to how someone should think about choosing?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I agree with David. There's no harm in doing all of them eventually, but it's good to focus on one at first. I think it's just sort of, what are you most interested in building? I've always enjoyed building mobile apps, and so I think if you're interested in how could I build an iOS app, or sort of use a lot of the cool stuff in the Android that the Android and iOS ecosystem provides, or put an app in the App Store. If that's something you've always wanted to do, that's a good track. Or if you really enjoy playing games and you've always wanted to make your own game, that's sort of a way to think about it. I think none of the tracks, I don't think any is harder than any other or have any sort of prerequisites. So I would just think about what do you want to be able to build? What's your goal? What do you really want to be able to create, and then pick the track that most aligns with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Stefan, for that question. Can we go to Isadora next? If you'd like to say hello and where in the world you are, Isadora?
Hello, my name is Isadora, and I'm from Brazil, but I'm currently staying in US right now. My question is that I've always had some problems and, of course, some challenges with computer science, but I was always interested in coding. And sometimes I feel a little intimidating, especially by seeing people younger than me that they're already doing things like that. They're already learning about all types of coding languages. And in your opinion, do you think there's a certain age and time to actually start learning about it? Or it doesn't matter, as long as you're interested in it and you actually want to, let's say, improve what you want to do in your career?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a really common question, honestly, that we see online a lot among students posting on CS50's Facebook group or subreddit on Reddit. And I think the short answer is no, it is never too late. You are never too old. And I would just try to put that kind of worry out of your mind. In fact, just a few days ago, someone posted in CS50's Facebook group asking the question, is there anyone over the age of, I think 50 it was at the time, or 55 they were. And it was so heartwarming to see just how many people started coming out of the woodwork and commenting on that thread that they too were older than that particular age. And I know it can feel the opposite way, perhaps because maybe younger people are just spending a lot more time on social media, perhaps. And so you just see a lot more of that activity. But no, I mean, certainly within CS50 in our courses, we see students who are very young of age and are getting a very early start, to folks who are mid-career and just kind of want to change or learn something new, or to folks who are in retirement and are just trying to pick up some new skill or build some new tool or the like. So truly, it is never too late. And I would try as best you can, just put that worry out of your mind. There's going to be plenty of other worries and challenges when it just comes to the coding itself. And I would focus on the technical problems, not anything related to age, for what it's worth. Well, thank you for that question, Isadora. Can we go next to Asweel? If you'd like to say hello and where you are from.
So my question is, this is a question I've been wanting to ask for a long time. I've actually asked in the last, in the last office hours, but I think I asked my question a little late or submitted my form a little late, so I didn't get a chance. So my question is pretty simple. Where does CS50 leave you after you finish a course in terms of your computer knowledge? Like specifically, if I finish CS50 and I go to the the iOS track, would I be able to jump into making full-fledged apps in the App Store?
It's a good question. Tommy, do you want to speak to how you thought about the tracks and what is a realistic outcome for students?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was thinking about building out the iOS track, I really wanted to empower people to build an iOS app as their final project. And so, the track will cover things like how to connect with an API or a website, or different visual elements for arranging the UI of your app. So I think a description of where it leaves you is you'll be able to build your first sort of simple apps, and it provides a good foundation for you to go and learn more. I think it'd be impossible to cover the entire iOS SDK in just one course, but we really wanted to build this foundation where you can go off and learn all these things yourself. So that's sort of where we wanted to leave you, is the ability to build something more complicated.
Yeah, thank you, Tommy and Asweel, for that one. Zaid, can we come to you next if you'd like to say hello to everyone and where you're from? Zaid?
Okay. Hi, I am from New Jersey, USA. My question is a bit general, but I want to ask about what level of math do you recommend for someone going into computer science, or for me specifically computer engineering? I've noted that as you start breaking away from that abstraction that Python and JavaScript, for example, have, and you start getting deeper into what a computer is more formally, there's a certain level of math that starts to rise up. So I just want to know beforehand, what level of math do you expect a computer scientist or a computer engineer to have formally before they start coding or understanding computers in a better manner?
Sure. Brian, do you perhaps want to field that, framing it not just as what you should know before starting CS, but also what you should eventually know mathematically in CS?
Yeah, so I think just to begin, you're probably good with just some working knowledge of algebra, because when you're assigning variables to values and manipulating those values, there's some algebra-like concepts that are involved there. And then after that, I think it depends in large part as to where in computer science you want to go. It's a fairly diverse field where there are a lot of different things that are happening. If you want to go into something just like building a web application, like what I cover in the web development course that follows CS50, there's really not a whole lot of math there. It's more just thinking logically and thinking about the different pieces that get put together. But as you start to think about things like, as applications start to grow bigger with more users and more data, and you start to think about trying to make sure that your algorithms are more efficient, then trying to do some calculations as to what is the efficiency of this algorithm is going to be, what is the most efficient way to solve this problem. There might be some more math there. And so depending on where in computer science you end up, you might find that things like probability and statistics can often be quite helpful for certain areas within computer science. If you're interested in diving much deeper into artificial intelligence and machine learning, then some more advanced math topics like calculus and linear algebra are probably going to be more relevant. But that's not going to be true of all people that are doing work in computer science. It very much depends on what your interests are.
Yeah, thank you, Zaid, for that question. Can we come next to Malcolm, if you'd like to say hello and where you're from?
Hey guys, how you guys doing? I'm Malcolm from Atlanta, Georgia. I want to say thank you, first of all, to all of you guys for putting so much energy into this class. It's awesome, absolutely awesome, and it helps a lot. It's helped a lot of people, so thank you, first of all. My question is, I've always been a man of why use 10 words when you can use 100 instead. So keeping things short and simple, I use the pseudo code. Mm-hmm. And I overcomplicate that as well. So what's your tip on keeping things simple and basic instead of too specific and making too many steps in your code, pseudo code,
whatever it's called.
Yep, pseudocode.
Pseudo.
Yeah, it's funny you should ask this today, because literally just yesterday when Tommy and I were talking about today's session, I texted him a screenshot of the TV show The Office, if you're familiar. And there's a scene in one of the episodes where Kevin, one of the characters, sort of jokingly says something like, "Why use many word when few word do trick?" So literally, I sent Tommy this meme just yesterday. And I think in the context of pseudocode, I can offer my perspective, and then let me turn it to Tommy too. I would generally think about pseudocode on maybe two levels, like high level and lower level. And below the lower level, I would say is your own code. So if I'm sitting down and trying to implement a solution to some problem, or specifically implement some function in C or Python or some other language, you know, my first implementation in pseudocode should probably only be 10 or 20 lines max. And for instance, to make this more real for me, in a teaching context, anytime I show pseudocode on the projector screen in CS50's lectures, I deliberately make sure that it fits on the screen. And so as such, that pseudocode's first version really does need to be like 5, 10, maybe 20 lines. And if you've taken CS50X already, you might recall the pseudocode for searching a phone book. You might recall our discussions in some years of making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So you might want to mentally constrain yourself and say, what could I fit on a PowerPoint slide or a Keynote or a Google slide? But invariably, that's going to be too high level to be useful sometimes, where when you sit down to actually translate your pseudocode into actual C code or Python or any other language, you might realize, wow, I really sort of waved my hands at some of these details. And so you need to change one line of pseudocode into maybe 5 more and really get into the weeds of the implementation details. So I would say that might be phase 2 of your pseudocode. And then I would somewhat arbitrarily, but from personal experience, say after that, then you probably want to start translating it to actual code. So sort of high-level pseudocode, low-level pseudocode, and then actual code. But Tommy, you of course spend a lot of time working on projects in the real world. Would you propose different heuristics?
I think that's right. I think before I sit down and write any code, I try to make sure I have an understanding of the problem I'm going to solve and what the solution actually is. I think sometimes when I just start writing code before I really know what the solution is, that's when I can get this sort of meandering, really long code. And so sometimes when I catch myself writing a function that seems overly complicated or overly long, I'll sort of stop and say, let me take a step back, make sure I actually understand what I'm doing. I think a related thought I often have is, what sometimes you're writing code, you end up writing a bunch of different, let's say, if statements to handle 10 different cases. When in reality, some of it is actually generalized and can be shared. So whenever I write a piece of code, I try to ask myself, okay, how is this sufficiently general? Is there any way I can make this even more general or share this code with something else so that I'm not duplicating functionality or sort of covering too many bases? And even just forcing yourself to go through that exercise. Every time I commit code, I do that. I sort of look at, here's all the new code I just wrote. Is this simple enough? And even just forcing yourself to go through that can help you see, oh, actually, this code is duplicated from over here. Let me simplify that.
Yeah, well, thank you, Malcolm, for that question. And just a reminder, if you've joined us more recently, if you would like to ask a question of me or Brian or Tommy, please do go to cs50.ly/ask, which will lead you to a Google form. If, Brian, you wouldn't mind pasting the URL once more in the chat. That's a lot easier for us to keep an eye on than all of the hands and chat messages that might be flying across the screen. And if asking a question too, per the form, do make sure your camera is on and your microphone is ready so that when we call on you, we can have you speak your question yourself. Venu, can we come to you next? And if you'd like to say hello and where you're from, Venu?
I'm Venu, I'm from India. I'm 15 years old and I just started CS50 about 2 months ago and now I'm about to finish the course. My question is, even though I'm exceedingly passionate about programming, I'm willing to pursue a career in finance. So how can a person like me who's not going to pursue a career in computer science proceed with programming in the future?
Yeah, really good question. Brian, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're definitely not alone. Even within CS50, most of the students who take CS50 are not people that are studying computer science and intending to pursue a career in computer science specifically. They're taking it because they think it's a valuable skill to know about. And I think that's definitely true, that even if you're not pursuing a career in computer science, in most areas within the world nowadays, computers intersect with other fields of our lives so much. And there are likely going to be ways in whatever you end up doing to be able to apply computer science to what you're working on. to find ways of automating things that take a lot of time, or trying to figure out how you can solve big problems that would be unreasonable for humans to solve in your field, but that a computer might be able to help with. And then even outside of your work, plenty of people that learn how to program just find programming fun. And even if it's not something they pursue as a career, you can always program and create projects of your own just as a hobby, and just to do something that is interesting and creative and enjoyable to you. So definitely many ways to keep programming and keep doing interesting work, even if you're not pursuing computer science specifically.
Indeed. Well, thank you, Vanu, for that question. Can we come next to Nicholas, if you'd like to say hello and where you're from?
Hello, this is Nicholas from Texas in the United States. My question was, so first, I'm a pharmacist by trade, and I wanted to know, is there a direct path or a preferred path from being a self-professed novice to someone who can code, with the goal in mind being, I'd like to be able to develop applications and programs to help make clinical decisions?
Yeah, that sounds like a really worthy goal. Tommy, do you want to speak to this and the applications in the real world?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that CS50 is a great foundation for starting to build those applications. And so after taking CS50, I would start thinking about, what types of apps do you want to build? It sounds like, a web application could be appropriate for what you're describing, and maybe even some machine learning in there too. And so, I don't think there's just one path from, I think everyone's path can be sort of different. And so I would just sort of go through, what interests you the most. Maybe this goal sounds awesome of building this sort of app. And so think about, what functionalities would I need this app to have? And then, go off and try to learn those technologies. But something I believe is the best way to learn is just by building something. And after CS50, you should have the tools to just start building. And eventually you might say, oh, I need this other skill because I've decided I need some ML in this app, so I can go off and take an ML course. But really just sort of learn by doing and build something and see where it takes you.
Yeah, thank you, Nicholas, for the question as well. Can we come next to Bayat, if you'd like to say hello too, and where you are from, Bayat?
Hi, I'm Bayat from Indonesia, and I've been doing DCS for 2 months in week 4 right now. And one thing that makes me confused, and a bit confused actually, is when you are debugging something, are you supposed to understand each of the program that you change? Or simply just like, I change this syntax, I change this number, and hopefully it works. That's okay. I mean, are we supposed to understand the changes that we make, or simply just change things and hope it will work? Because in the week one, I did that in the Mario. I just changed the numbers and things.
Sure. So your microphone is a little staticky, so let me just read the question you typed in too, just to make sure everyone heard you correctly. So when it comes to debugging a program, are you supposed to understand each change that you make in order to make that program work, or simply just change things up and see whether it works or not? So it's a really good question, and it's so common among students who are learning how to program first. And I would say that, yes, absolutely, you should be understanding everything you are doing. And I can totally appreciate that when you're tired or stressed or you have a homework assignment due, frankly, you probably just care mostly about getting it to work, submitting it, and moving on. But if you really want to become good at programming, there should never be anything about your code that you don't understand. Now, it might take a while, maybe several months, several years to get to that place of comfort, but that should always be your goal. Like, there really is no magic when it comes to programming. Assuming that your compiler is working and your programming environment is working, if there's a mistake or something that's weird going on, odds are it's your fault, like not the tools or anything else. And I think the best way to learn really is to go down the sort of metaphorical rabbit hole, such that if you don't understand something, try to figure it out. Use a debugger, walk through your code step by step, ask a friend, assuming you're allowed to in the context of a homework assignment, and see if they see something that you don't. And in fact, the only thing that ever disappoints me about a new programmer is when they just kind of give up and they sort of say, oh, I don't know why it fixed it, but it fixed it. Like, that's like not learning, that's just submitting. And so I would encourage you, and it will take practice, to always strive to understand things. Even if you don't see it at first, come back to the problem days or weeks later. And there's nothing more gratifying than realizing that you do understand everything going on in a program. And over time, there will be fewer and fewer things that you don't understand. Well, thank you for that question, Bayat. Can we go next to Aruna Shefbar? Aruna Shefbar, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. If you'd like to say it as well and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Aruneshwar from India.
Nice to meet.
So my question is, there are services like Wix getting popularity nowadays where a developer can just create a website by drag and drop. There's no need for them to write any code manually. So how do you think this is going to affect web development in the future?
Yeah, this is actually a new kind of buzzword, no code or low code tools like Wix and Squarespace and other tools where you can program almost like Scratch by just dragging and dropping things, but actually make web applications and mobile applications. Tommy, do you want to speak to this trend?
Yeah, it's definitely this really interesting trend, and I think ultimately the goal of this movement is to enable anybody to write code. And so I think where these tools are, they're a really great starting point. If you want to just prototype an app, there are tools like Bubble and Webflow and a few other ones where you can not only build a static site but build something like a login functionality or some way to visualize data. And so I see them as this great entry point. Anyone can build a prototype and get something up and running. I think ultimately once you want to do something more complex and at a larger scale, you'll probably need to do some of the programming yourself. But I think what this will do is sort of inspire a large group of people who weren't able to build anything before to build something and sort of get their foot into the door to programming, and then they can sort of learn more of the formal programming from there and build something more complicated.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I myself was just experimenting with some of those tools recently, not because I didn't know how to code, but because I figured this tool could actually just speed up the development process for me. I could sort of drag and drop some things, generate, in my case, some sample HTML code, but then copy paste the HTML into my own code files and make some changes. And that's where I think things are especially powerful. Like, if you only know how to drag and drop these puzzle pieces on Wix and Squarespace and the like you can't really fine tune things the way you want. You can't quite get it to do or look just the way you want. So still understanding HTML, CSS, and any number of other programming languages, I think just gives you more power ultimately. And so trying to understand things early on from the bottom up can then just make those tools even more useful for you. Well, thank you for that question. Can we go next to Samuel, if you'd like to, or I'm sorry, Kumsin? If you'd like to say hello, Kumsin, and where you're from.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you very much. I am Samuel Kumsin from Ghana, but I'm currently staying and volunteering in Kenya. My question is, does studying CS50 or computer science make you a computer hardware or software savvy?
Yeah, really good question. Brian, do you want to answer this?
Sure. Yeah. So taking CS50, studying computer science, at least, will probably focus a little bit more on the software than on the hardware, at least in CS50 as an introductory class. But I'd say that it's a good starting point for regardless of whether your interests lie in software or hardware, because the two are interconnected, that you need to make sure that the software is integrating well with the hardware, the computer that you're actually running the software on. And so learning about the types of things that you'll learn in a class like CS50, an introduction to thinking about programming, but also thinking about what it is that your programs are doing in an underlying sense inside of the computer, thinking about memory, thinking about data and how that data is represented and how that data is stored. Will start you down that path of thinking a little bit more about what's going on inside of a computer's hardware. But if you're interested in computer hardware, there are other classes that are really focused on computer hardware itself that'll give you a much better, more in-depth exposure to those areas too.
Indeed. Well, thank you, Samuel, for that question. Can we come next to Syed, if you'd like to say hello and where you're from? And I hope I'm pronouncing your name right.
Hi, my name is Rais, actually.
Rais, so, my apologies.
My question basically is that I am basically trying my...
Oh, I think we lost your audio. Rais, I'm not sure if you can hear me. I don't think you can, but I'm going to go ahead and read your question aloud. Rais is a lawyer and more interested in the computers field. How does he bridge his career, or any suggestions on how he can balance both of the courses? He's taking CS50L or CS50 for lawyers. If Brian, you wouldn't mind pasting that URL into the chat. And Rais, I'm not sure if you heard me, but we had trouble hearing you and your microphone. But allow me to speak to this. I teach this course, CS50 for lawyers, with a colleague of mine, CS50's own Doug Lloyd. And I would say among our goals with that kind of class is not to turn students into programmers or engineers. Indeed, it's not meant to be a bottom-up class, so to speak, but really a top-down one, so that lawyers and others in the real world have a better understanding of how technology works and how they can make informed decisions that somehow intersect with technology. So in the world of law, for instance, intellectual property is a very common field of pursuit among lawyers, where you have to decide who owns something and what it means to own that code or that algorithm. It's very often the case that lawyers are involved in government and making decisions that impact citizens and laws for a community. And so understanding what net neutrality, for instance, means and how the internet itself works so that you can make informed decisions when it comes to governing, I think is another one of our aspirations. Granted, with just one small class of our own, but there's just so many people in the US and I'm sure abroad as well who are in positions of power in government and who are making very uninformed decisions. They just don't even understand the technology that they're legislating. And you might have seen this years ago when a year or two ago when Mark Zuckerberg, for instance, on Facebook's behalf, testified in front of the US Congress. And so many people on the other side of the table didn't really even understand the platform. And so I think that's sort of symptomatic of having a population that doesn't necessarily understand the technology that you and I and all of us use every day. So that, I think, is really the opportunity from a class like CS50 for lawyers to make more informed decisions that do the right thing for other people. Well, thank you, Rais, for that question. Can we go to Pratik next? If you'd like to say hello, Pratik, if you'd like to say where you're from too.
Hello, I want to ask that I want to do Python. So what would be the best way to learn Python as a beginner?
The best way to learn Python. Brian, what suggestions do you have on this?
Yeah, so if you, actually, Pratik, if I could ask a follow-up question to you. Is Python your first programming language, or have you already had some prior programming experience in another language already?
I have done Java, C++ firstly, then I'm moving to Python.
Okay, so if you've already had a little bit of programming experience in some other language like Java or C++, one thing that you'll probably find is that the syntax of Python is not going to be all that difficult to pick up once you already have the basics of the syntax of some other language. But all these languages all have a lot of the same constructs. They all have loops, they all have conditions, they all have functions, they all have variables that have different types. So a lot of the ideas that you already know will translate quite well. There'll just be, at the beginning at least, some syntactic differences that you'll have to get used to about the different language, and then you can dive into some of the more nuances there. I think a good place to start, for example, might be CS50's own Python lecture, which will show you side by side some C code, kind of like C++ or Java, and then what the Python equivalent of that might be. But then what I find personally works well for me is looking at Python's own website that has sample code that shows you how to use some of the built-in functions and how all that works. So taking a look at other people's code in Python and translating that into what I already know about other languages, I think can be a helpful way to get started. And then after that, I'd suggest trying to write something in Python. The best way to learn a language is to get practice working with it. So if you pick a project that's interesting to you and see if you can create that in Python, that will definitely help you learn too.
I've pasted a couple of links based on Brian's response too, Pratik, that you might find helpful in the chat, both to our website, our lecture on Python, as well as to Python's own tutorial. Well, thank you for that question. Can we come next to Sam, if you'd like to say hi and where you're from?
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm from England and I'm studying in Edinburgh. Now, firstly, I want to say a huge thank you to all of you for making this course. I think it's great. Now, you mentioned a few questions ago about the proverbial rabbit hole and how sometimes you wish people would go down it. Now, I love the idea of being a self-sufficient programmer, but I find this rabbit hole a little bit daunting sometimes. Sometimes you need the wave of the hand explanation, So I was wondering which online resources alongside CS50 would be useful when looking for help, basically.
Yeah, really good question. Tommy, what resources do you recommend people turn to for help with learning and solving problems?
Yeah, I think, so going to a language's documentation or a library's documentation is a really good starting point. In particular, as you're going down that rabbit hole, you can see exactly what are all the different functions that exist, what are the parameters those functions expect, how do you use them. But I think my favorite way to learn a new library or to go down that rabbit hole is to look at other example usages. So whenever I'm learning, let's say I found some new iOS library and I want to learn how to use it inside of my code base, the first thing I'll look at is just some examples. See, how are other people using this library? What functions are they calling? And then ask myself, why might they be calling them? And then, from that example, maybe go into the documentation and say, okay, here's what this function does. So this is why they might be using it. So I like to sort of go in that order, but everybody's different. Some people kind of like going the other way, and they want to read the entire documentation page first before they look at any examples. But a lot of languages and libraries nowadays have some really great resources that you can sort of read through and guide your search.
Yeah, and you're probably already familiar with sites like Stack Overflow, which I've pasted into the chat, and Google will very often lead you to Stack Overflow. But to Tommy's point, I just yesterday, I was trying to understand how to do something in Python with a certain library that Python offers. And honestly, Python's documentation is not very straightforward half of the time. It doesn't tend to have very user-friendly examples. So literally, I typed in like the name of the function I was interested in, and then space, and then example or sample. So literally, just find me someone else on the internet who can explain to me what the documentation was trying to say. So I think it goes both ways in that sense too. But at the end of the day, once you do get more comfortable, hands down, like seeking out the canonical definitions of functions, that is to say the references, the online sources from the language creators or the frameworks creators, is a great way to get comfortable. And often too, it's admittedly not written to be very user-friendly. So you'll get to that point of comfort, but that's where you can get the most definitive answers. So something to work up to. Well, thank you, Sam, for that question. Can we come next to, let's say, Amartha? Amartha, if you'd like to say hello and where you're from.
Hello, I am from Pakistan, and my question is, I'm very new to CS50, and I want to ask how to start, from where to start. I'm already a computer student, but I have not a good knowledge of it. So please guide me how to go through the course and from where to start.
Okay, sure. So Brian, do you want to give a quick expert's advice on how to go through CS50X successfully?
Yeah, certainly. So in terms of the website for where to start, you can go to cs50.edx.org, which I've just pasted into the chat as a place to begin. And I think if you're looking for a place to start where to sort of get the most out of the course, you should generally start. So the course is divided into a number of different weeks, where each week focuses on a different topic. And my advice usually is start the week by watching the lecture and following along and trying to see if you understand it. And if there's something in the lecture that went by too quickly or you didn't quite understand it, you can always go back to that point in the lecture. You can look at the notes or the source code associated with that lecture to get more information. And in addition to the lecture, there are also some shorter videos produced by Doug Lloyd, another member of our team, who talks about a lot of the lecture topics in even more depth. So yet another video resource that you can turn to as well. So I would definitely take advantage of those curricular resources. And then the other thing that I would suggest in terms of just getting the most out of the course and getting started is to take your time, that it's not a race to see how quickly you can finish the class, that you'll really get the most out of the class if you're taking the time to understand all of the code that you're writing, if you're taking the time to try to improve your code after you've written it, so that you really leave each of the weeks of the course really feeling like you've understood those concepts and you feel confident in your ability to work with those ideas and write programs based on what it is that you've learned. So 1 week at a time, taking advantage of those resources that are made available to you. And there are many CS50 communities out there of other students who are taking the course as well that you're always welcome to talk to and interact with to get help and support as you're going through it.
Thank you, Amartha, for that question. I think we have time for just one or so more questions. And let me let folks know that if you've attended these before, you'll know that at the very end, we try to take a group photo. And we'll do that in just a minute or two, where we invite everyone to turn on their cameras and wave hello if you would like to take part. But first, let's go lastly to Emmanuel, if you'd like to say hello and where you're from.
Hi, my name is Gustavo. I'm from Brazil. I'm 14 years old. My ask is, how can I improve my programming logic? And do you have any tip to give for us?
How can you improve your programming logic?
Yes.
Get better at that. Tommy, would you like to field our final question and forward-thinking advice?
Yeah, sure. So I think the best way is really just practice. And so, one thing that I talk about in that that interviewing seminar is, something like interviewing is just sort of the skill, and there's so many like interviewing questions you can just sort of read, and whether or not you're interviewing or not, those types of questions are really great practice because they're often designed to be solved in 20 to 30 minutes or so, and they're very well specified. And so there's sites like Leet Code and Top Coder and Project Euler that just have a bunch of problems that you can just go in and practice. And a lot of those problems, there are really logic-based. It's less about how do I build a website or integrated database library, and more about here's some interesting problem you can solve, and let's sort of like apply your critical thinking and logic to solve it. So those are pretty fun to do if you're interested in practicing on those. So I think those types of problems, spend 30 minutes on one, maybe one, try one every day, and you'll see you're just sort of getting better and better at it. But I think, yeah, that's the best answer, is just the more practice, the better you're going to get.
Well, thank you, Emmanuel, for that question, and Tommy as well. So if you would like, please do turn on your camera now if you would like to appear in the group photo. And this always takes an awkward number of seconds because we need enough time to click from left to right through all of the screens of people who are in attendance here via Zoom. But if you'd like to wave or smile or generally look your best for just a few more seconds, allow me to see if Brian would like to offer some parting words.
I just wanted to say it was really good to hear from all of you today. We hope to do this again soon. I want to say thank you to Tommy for taking the time to join us today and provide your insights on software engineering in the real world. That's been great to hear about your answers as well. So thanks so much to everyone for all of your great questions. I'm sorry that we didn't have a chance to make it to everyone's questions. There were a lot more questions than we had time for in just this hour. But we'll try to do this again soon so that hopefully if you didn't get a chance to have your question asked today, that you'll be able to ask in the future.
And Tommy, as we all finish waving here, some final thoughts for the group?
No, it was great meeting everybody, and best of luck with CS50. I'm really excited to see so many people going through the course, and really excited to see what you can build afterwards.
Well, thank you to our special guest and to everyone for tuning in. This was CS50.